Hey guys, welcome to another podcast of where I just talk about me and myself and everything. That is literally the whole thing about this podcast. It's called the Main Character Podcast, Main Character Complex. I am the main character in this podcast, therefore I can talk about whatever I want. So today we'll be talking about the plot of Project Evaluate, a very complex story with world building and adventure characters that I have made into this very long, how very long is this? The 66 slide thing, and it's not even done yet, okay? The slide kind of ends midway through the plot because I was like, yeah, anyways. So I will be going through, this is a very, this story has gone through many formats. I don't know if I want it, like, obviously hypothetically, I don't know if I want it to be like an animated TV show, a live action TV show, a live action like movie trilogy, or like a book series, or like a comic series, like a graphic novel. I don't know. Like, I don't know what format to make this story because it's just crazy. I don't know. It's just such a big, and it's like also non-linear because there's so much history to it. Like, I don't want to like info dump at the beginning. Like, I've looked at my old drafts. Like, the only one I've like done storyboards for this. I've done like script starters. I've done all sorts of things. I've written like different versions of like maybe 4 or 5 different drafts, like for the first like maybe 14 chapters or something like that. It's crazy. And it's like I've barely scraped the surface of like actually creating this thing. And all I've got is this like character creation and world building and like, because this is a zombie apocalypse kind of thing. Just let me get into it, okay? And I've done like all the science and the illness and it's like a whole thing. And it's like, I don't know how to do it without info dumping. Like I've looked over my first 3 drafts of what I've written and it's like info dumping. Obviously, my bad experience is writing because I was younger, but like I'm that young anymore. As in I'm older now and I've got more experience in writing and I was like, you shouldn't have info dumped. But it's like I still don't know how to do it without info dumping because there's so much history and so much like stuff where it's like anyways, I'm just gonna do it in a podcast because I don't know. This is just random stuff that I made. All right, Project Evaluate is the name of the story. I think from now, that's what I did when I started making the story. And that's what it is now. I might change it because it's kind of cringe, but I will. Project Evaluate. I remember conceiving this idea. There was one science class in 2019 when we were learning about immunity and genetics in class, and we were in year 9, 2019, and this was before the pandemic, and I learned about the definition of a pandemic in class because we were learning about immunity, and I was like, oh my god, this is kind of cool, an idea. What if we went into a pandemic, guys, like a zombie pandemic? Oh my god. And then literally like a few months later we were hit by you know what. But anyways, that is when I originated this plot. Now let's just get on. We don't need to pay attention to this quiz. We can do the quiz later, but hey. Now this is the premise of I made these slides so I could coherently like present this story to someone if I ever have to, because since I don't actually have like a book I wrote or like a movie I made to direct them to, so instead go with this 66 slide presentation. So this is the premise of my zombie apocalypse action movie series book story thing. Anyways, so this is the history, right? We got the stage 1 virus. Oh, this thing is a virus, right? It's a zombie. I've told you about this. So this is the science of the zombies, okay? So the virus that took over that essentially is what causes the zombies. There's like different stages, right? And I've defined them into 3 different stages. So the first, as in like mutations, right? Because viruses like mutate. So stage 1 of this thing was in 2032, right? So this is based in the future. So in 2032, a virus broke out on the coastal shores of the Indian Ocean. So just around the coast, right? So there's like beachy areas, right? The Indian Ocean, and it caused a lot of people to be delusional. Can you hear my parents in the next room? Probably. I am so sorry, guys. I don't care enough to like do anything about it. Anyways, so it caused this stage 1 caused people just to be delusional and violent, right? So it had like the brains, it made them like all angry and stuff, and it's violent, as well as making their like body matter to deteriorate. Like it would eat away at like the flesh, and it would just like be killing a bunch of the cells, and it would be doing a whole sort of thing. So basically, the body would be deteriorating, and they ended up dying a few days after, like being infected, because the vital organs would start to break down. Like at the beginning, it'd be like the skin, maybe like the muscles, maybe like a leg. You know what I mean? But then once it hit the vital organs, which is after a few days, they would just die, and it was a very infectious thing. So even though people tried to contain it, it still spread. So stage 2 is stage 2 is when after a few years it continued to spread into a pandemic, right? So it's gone all around the world, right? We know this. So a vaccine was made, right? Except they tried to use the part the part that the vaccine was trying to target, anyway, it's not like an actual vaccine like how we do it these days, science, blah blah blah. If you know, you know. This is like a different type of vaccine that this fictional world tried to do, where they like genetically try to like do science, and like obviously messed up because anyways, they tried to like use the genetic sequence of this virus, the section that is coding for the like the tissue deterioration, like the part where it like eats up all your muscles and all your cells. They tried to like fight that by making it like an adverse like gene coding to that, by finding a way to stop the tissue from deteriorating. But that ended up mutating the whole thing, right? Because we obviously aren't super good at gene modification, you know, seen by exhibit A, B, C, D, i.e. every superhero movie ever. Because it always goes wrong, doesn't it? And it ended up like helping the virus and mutating it into the second stage, where essentially the victims would just keep the bodies, like they would not die, because in the attempt to stop tissue deteriorating, it tried to help it like regenerate really quickly, or like fight against like the fact that it was deteriorating. And so now stage 2 just meant that people would like get sick, get, you know, violent and hallucinate, but like their bodies would still be deteriorating, you know, like the lungs would be like falling out, but like they would just not be dead, right? Yeah, because that, yeah. Stage 2, stage 3. So it's been multiple years into this like pandemic quarantine, right? Because they began making like bunkers and stuff for survivors to like stay, right? So then like you wouldn't get infected. But then obviously it wasn't long before America was like, haha, you know what's a good idea? You know what's a brilliant idea, guys? Let's nuclear bomb literally the rest of the world. Like, it was getting that bad, guys. Like, they were making little like houses and apartments for people to live in, because like little bunkers, because like everyone was getting infected. This is like really infectious, and people were dying, and like the people getting violent when they're sick, so they're like attacking people, so then you get sick, so they were making these bunkers, and so everyone was getting like infected. It was kind of bad. It's not like, you know, like our little virus, that like, you know, it's like less violent, I guess. I guess you're not like screaming and crawling on the street trying to attack people and stuff like that. You know, it's just classic zombie stuff, okay? And so America was like, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's just bomb everyone, you know? And so everyone in the world, including every state in the US, okay, except Virginia, which is where like the government is, which is why, except that state, ended up being a radioactive apocalypse, because they literally just tried to bomb it everywhere. And even then, you know, radioactive decay and like the fallout went into Virginia. So like, rip, guys, that was a great idea. Like, what brain did you use? Like, obviously fallout's going to go into your state, dumbasses. Anyways, so the radiation ended up mutating the virus even more, which basically let the people who are infected, be much stronger and agile. So hey, even though your body's deteriorating, you're still going to be fighting. Like, the body doesn't care, right? Because it's dumb, right? This virus just got mutated, doesn't care. So now, and also including to this, so the fact they can't even like die, right, conventionally, because their bodies are deteriorating, but because of the second stage of the vaccine thing, they aren't, you know, dying immediately. They're just like being crazy and violent or whatever. And now, added to that, this radiation has made them be a lot stronger and agile. So, you know, great. And now also infected soldiers are a threat, because they still have like their physical abilities and skills, you know. So if you're like a trained like military guy and then you got infected, yeah, now you're like that, but also like you hallucinating and violent, and you don't know what you're doing because you've lost your mind, essentially. And added on to that, the infected also are like more intelligent, and they can form like strategized attacks and stuff like that, because they are still like kind of human, but like they've lost like their whole identity because they're going crazy. Alright, so stage 1 of the disease symptoms is decaying, bleeding, and skin falling off because of the deteriorating tissue. We've also got a fever, we've got violence, unable to recognize close ones, and hallucinations. And hallucinations is also part of the like, they've lost their mind because they don't actually know what reality is anymore. They don't know what the cause is yet, and it's very infectious. It's airborne and direct contact by touching contaminated surfaces. You know, it's untreatable and fatal. So the victim ends up dying once the disease begins to decay the heart, brain, or lungs. It usually can like sort of survive. It gets like a kidney or a liver or a stomach, you know, but it really just goes out with those 3 organs. And that takes usually around 2 to 3 days. Now, stage 2 is kind of the same, except it's no longer fatal. It is still untreatable, and the key change is, as I said, it's that the body no longer needs its vital organs. The only one it really needs is the brain. Blah blah blah. Now the third stage, they're still intelligent. This is where they become a bit more intelligent, and a lot stronger, and also like that. And they can't recognize, you know, people they know or anything or stuff like that. And they become more murderous and violent. So, you know, science behind zombies essentially is what I created. Now, this is like the history of like the world as I said, a lot of backstory, okay? We've got the creation of the cities. So the area that this dystopian, futuristic, apocalyptic world is set in is called the cities. There's 3 of them. So next 60 years, I said there's like 90 years. There's 90 years of like history here that is before the beginning of the story, the start of the story. So like, again, how am I supposed to not info dump? Anyways, so during the next 60 years, the survivors in Virginia began making the cities. So it's composed of the underground, a series of multi-level network beneath, which is like, there's a bunch of like levels underneath the ground, the 7 pillars, which is 7 large pillars above the underground that holds up the sanctuary, which is like a clean and like where the rich live essentially, and it's like imagine like it's essentially like there's a city underground, right? Like a city underground under the floor, the dirt, the ground, and then on top of that we got 7 like really big towers, big strong sturdy towers, 7 of them. They're called the 7 pillars, and on top of the pillars they're holding up this like elevation, like this whole, like it's a roof. Pretend it's a roof, but on top of that roof is like the floor of what is the sanctuary, which is a rich city because it can reach sunlight because it's a bunch of clouds and stuff that like won't go away because, you know, radioactive apocalyptic wasteland. But that sanctuary reaches above those clouds so they can sort of reach sunlight. And inside the pillars is where like the military and the services are, because they're like first contact to the infected who are roaming the wasteland, right? Because they're on the actual land. The period during the years of this creation, so in these 60 years, was a war, essentially because competent survivors, as in people who like weren't like children, basically became soldiers to defend the builders from the infected who were trying to attack them as they're trying to build this like massive thing. So this took like 60 years to make. The battlefield is what is dubbed, which is what they've like named the ground that's underneath the sanctuary, so like normal ground, and basically where the pillars are, like, yeah. And in the battlefield is a bunch of abandoned warehouses, abandoned like mini towns, and just where the infected kind of like roam. And the infected are like attracted to like noise, and they're attracted to like other infected, and if there's like movement, they all kind of swarm, whatever. So like the fact that like there was a bunch of building here, and also like a bunch of like fighting and stuff to defend the affected, like interrupting their building, and the fact that like people like live there, and there's like noise from like the factories and like cars and stuff, like the little trucks and stuff like that. Obviously there's a bunch of infected like in that area. There's a big concentration there. And they just kind of roam this thing. And the cities are like really big as well. So we got some pictures that I just grabbed. The sanctuary, as I said, it's more prestigious. This is where like higher education, advanced medical practices, science, and agriculture, because it's in sunlight hits. And you can see it's like your classical, like what you think, like when you think of like a utopia, like a if, you know, the meme where it's like, if this happens, like the future if this happened, you know, the future if I became president, you know. And it's like a shiny thing. There's like a lot of glass, a lot of like trees and stuff because they're taking advantage of the sun, etc. Then the battlefield, I just got a little picture here where it's like, you know, it's your classic like post-war / your what you would think an apocalyptic wasteland would look like, you know, classic. Now the soldiers, kind of what they look like. I just put this one in here. It's just to survive the radioactive atmosphere. Because remember, this is all radioactive, and essentially the survivors, they're all just like living. The only reason they're like not like dead is because they're in these bunkers that they built at the very beginning. Remember, because they were like, we need to like find a place where like this airborne, you know, virus that is going to kill everyone and anyone. And stay away from this. We made these little bunkers, and they're essentially living in that as where they're building. But for like builders and also soldiers, they've had to like wear these special gear. So it started obviously in 2032 when they were like obviously handling all this before, but then modern technology ends up like being introduced to this suit because, you know, time and technology advancements. So that basically was full body suit, you know, with armor and stuff like that, and it has a helmet, and it has like they have like communication, like head comms to the pillars, which is like again where the military operations go from. So it's from there. And the suit also the self-destructive like suicide feature, just in case the soldier's infected. Because remember, if a soldier is infected, like if you're really skilled at like fighting and you become infected, you still keep those skills, right? So you're like extra dangerous. And also like if you know like how to get into like the I don't know, like if you know what the mission was and you get infected, then when you're infected you can like sabotage the mission. So anyway, so they've got that little self-destruct feature just in case. I guess that people can like do if they're like morally integral or something. I don't know. And the underground is like for the poorer, sort of more common people. And the lower the level are, the poorer. So like the deeper you kind of go in the levels of this underground city, the poorer, because obviously it's less maintained. By 2090, which is like 60 years after 2032 when this all started, A lot of the levels are like dodgy and very poorly supported, as I said. And the higher levels are mostly owned by like government or operations or like sanctuary kind of like business or like maybe education, stuff like that. So you can see on the left, this little picture is like a more dirty one that I randomly got, probably from video games, to be honest. And then from the right hand side, that's like a more like shiny one. So this might be like a science facility or something that's on the higher levels of the underground. And the underground also has a bunch of like apartments and there's a bunch where people live again. It's same sanctuary. The pillars are like the only ones where people don't really live, except maybe like soldiers in their bunkers because that's the military operations. Anyway, yeah, so in pillars, this is mostly military operations and hospitals. Hospitals is like the main stuff in the pillars, again, because you have to like go there if you're hurt as a soldier. There are elevators, and the levels in the cities are named 0. So ground floor is called level 0, and then the underground levels are the negatives, and obviously sanctuaries are, like level 20 or something like that. Again, soldiers is another slide, just me expanding. So soldiers have these optimized suits and weapons to fight the infected, since, the radiation, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, they need oxygen, so there's oxygen in the helmets. And also for weapons, they have a blaster gun, so it's like an advanced, like essentially what if you have in Star Wars, so it shoots like an energy blast, and it has a little battery pack that they wear on their back, like their backpack. And then they also have a short like sword or like dagger, like one of those short like swords that they have that can like eject from like their arm, like their arm, like their forearm, like their armor. Because the only effective way to kill an infected is to attach the head or take out the heart or completely like destroy the body, basically. Now this is like another complex like thing that I made up that was like I don't know how to add this into the like any like form of like content for the story, right? So this is miracle soldiers. So let me see if I can explain this. So stage 3 of the virus, which basically again took the it has like the stopping the tissue deterioration feature in the vaccine, which causes it to mutate, blah blah. It also feature also created another like thing called the miracle cell. So basically this cell is like, or this like effect is that it was the disease, but it was like asleep, like a stagnant cell, like one of those like those illnesses like don't appear unless you trigger it or something. And basically it was like so basically you're infected, but like you're not sick, right? So it's like asleep, like it's literally like you don't even have it, except it has the tissue regeneration thing. Like the thing that basically backfired and made the virus mutate into the fact that the infected didn't like die because their tissue was deteriorating. That part that basically it sort of worked, a little bit worked, and that part that worked entered this miracle cell. And so the cell basically causes that tissue generation exists. So you would not be, if you had this cell, like this effect, like if you got infected, but I'll talk about that in a minute, but basically if you had the cell, you wouldn't be sick, but you would have the disease asleep in you. So there's like that little risk, but you would have this tissue regeneration. So basically, they figured this out because after a few years, like a few decades and stuff, a bunch of soldiers just weren't aging, and people were like, why do you look exactly the same after a few decades? Because this has been like 60 years, and then that's when they realized that the miracle cell existed, because a bunch of soldiers physically just stopped aging, right? And they were like testing the cells, and like these were young cells, and they were like, what's going on? And then so in like the people who would end up like with this cell, it was basically just natural. So like no one really knows why you would like get like why you would like either get infected and like become a zombie, or you would get this miracle cell and essentially become like physically immortal. And so those who had it were called miracle soldiers because it was called the miracle cell, because it was like no one knows what this is. It's the miracle. They like seriously, like I'll talk about in a minute, but like no one knows what the hell went because it was like a complete accident that this happened. Because they made the vaccine, they thought it was going to work, and then it backfired. And it was called the miracle soldiers because it seemed to only be soldiers that were getting them, and then they get this hypothesis that it was because they had the most exposure to the virus, and so they had more chance of like getting infected, but like instead of getting infected, they got the miracle cell. So scientists thought, when this happened, like maybe 20, 30 years after they realized that people weren't aging, scientists thought that this was like the breakthrough, this was like the cure, right? Because this like was the thing that they thought was a cure, and then it went wrong, and now it turns out it could actually maybe be a cure. Wait, and so they were like, but then after a bunch of like experimenting, like nothing, like they couldn't find anything. It was like, what the hell is going on? They couldn't find anything. In late 2060s, so not yet. The 92 is when the story starts. So in the late 60s, the miracle soldiers, which already was a rarity, like it wasn't like it was happening to everyone, like this was a few people, they began to die off because the sleeping cell, like the miracle cell, which is basically a sleeping disease, it ended up like waking up, like being triggered for like no reason. Again, people don't really know why, and it causes them to be infected, and so they had to be like terminated. They had to be killed because they got infected because of the sleeping thing. Then in the early 2070s, so a few years after the 2060s when this started happening, the government was like, you know what, stop. They ceased all practical experiments of the virus, and the cities were in like full quarantine because they were finishing up building the cities. So like, that's it, no more samples of the virus was allowed inside, because if there was an outbreak inside the cities, it would like be a disaster. And so they were like, nah, after this, all these miracle soldiers started getting sick again. They were like that. So they stopped all practical. So you only allowed theoretical experimentations of the virus, not practical. So that was a bit of a bummer. So this leads into Project Evaluate, which is the name of the book. Hey, so Project Evaluate is I don't know if I'm going to change it. I don't know. Is the name of the project the government executed in 2082. So this is a few years after they banned all practical experiments. So this is when the war ended. 82 is when the war ended, and the war ended. It didn't really end. Basically, the construction of the cities were completed, and which means that they didn't have to fight the infected anymore. So technically, the war ended. And the infected like tried to fight, but like there's wars and stuff like defense. So that the war ended / the building stopped in 2082, and Project Evaluate was named the project the government made. Basically, since all practical experimentation of the virus was terminated, the government created a building, like a little like building, it's big like little warehouse, miles away from the cities, called Building L or EL. Might change that again. I don't know. It's something I made up when I started this, and I just kept it. Basically, all the equipment that was required to test the virus and like do experiments, like all the equipment, all that was in this Building L, which is a few miles away from the city. And so Project Evaluate was basically to send a few soldiers and scientists, specifically 3 soldiers and 4 scientists. And it was supposed to be like a little thing where like each few years they would swap out soldiers and scientists, and they'll send them out, and there they would be like testing for the cure and like, you know, continue testing and do experiments and research and they can have all the like infected samples they want, blah blah blah, because like no one would like get like, it wouldn't be like terrible or bad like if there was an outbreak, because it was just a little building in the middle of nowhere, and it like wouldn't continue endangering the rest of the population. But after a week after the departure, all communication was lost and Project Evaluate was cancelled. So they thought that on the way there, the truck like crashed or they got attacked by a bunch of them and they all died. And so no further attempts at like practical experimentation was attempted. So like all basically like no one is testing for a cure anymore. No one's doing anything anymore. And then all theoretical experimentation just closed in the early 2090s. Because basically they were like, we literally did everything we can. We have no more brain anymore, no more thoughts. Like we're done. We've literally thought of everything that's ever existed. We're done. So they were like, so then all funding was cut and just everyone was like, eh. So this is the timeline. Quickly over it. Again, this is like 60 years of history. How can I like not info dump? Like it's, I don't know. Anyways, so around 2032 September is when the first epidemic started. 2033 February, the pandemic was starting. Then in April, people began evacuating. So people were like, oh, wait, guys, like this is like a 2 month later. They're like, guys, this is kind of like really, really bad. And then literally like 2 months after that, 2 billion people have died. And research is like going off. They're like, guys, we really got to do something about this. About 3 months later after that, it's been about a year. So about a year after, exactly a year after the first epidemic, 2.7 billion people have died. So, you know, it's going not that great. Then maybe like about 6 months after that, 3 billion people have died, and first human subject tests begin, because they're like, we've got to really speed run this vaccine thing, right? And this like very complex gene alteration, personal mutation, adaptation vaccine thing that we've got going on, you know, the one that goes wrong in all the movies, you know, we're going to try that. First things first. A few months after that, 3.2 billion people have died, and the tests are malfunctioning. As I said, like it's been like 4 months when first tests on human began, and then 4 months later they were like giving it out to the whole population. So obviously things are going to go wrong, like idiots. And bunkers are being built. People are like, okay, the tests are malfunctioning. So many people have died, and there's a bunch of infected like besties. And then they finally declare that the medicine have gone wrong in August of that year, and research continues, and everyone's like, bro. And then, okay, May the 5th, 2035, so this is 3 years after the first epidemic, 4 billion people have died, which is more than half the original population. I just got a cramp. Ow. Ow, 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 ow. Okay, we're good. This is when the USA decided to nuke the rest of the world without notice. So they don't just tell anyone, everyone just starts. No one knows how many died or how many lived, or, because from the initial blast, whether they died, or from the radiation and stuff like that afterwards, or they got infected, blah, blah, blah. Then about like 6 months later, in October, the official census of the USA recorded 2.1 million people left. Ow! Jesus, this cramp. Ooh. Ow. Okay. They managed to record 21.7 million living people left. Probably in around the state in Virginia, because they probably sent a thing like, if you're alive, trying to make it here, where we're building the bunkers, the bigger bunkers. About 4 months after that, in January 1936, the government starts making these bunkers and quarantine areas, and then about a year after that, so like 11 months, they start building the sanctuary, because of course they start building the sanctuary first. Then a few months later, 470 soldiers have died protecting the construction areas and bunkers. Then 2 months later, the first pillar has been created. In 63 August, 2 more pillars have been created. The underground is almost established, because obviously they're like, we're making the sanctuary because we're the government, we're cool like that. And then they're like, wait, there's a bunch of people here, they're going to live somewhere, let's just dig a hole and put them in there. And that's how the underground was created. In 67 of March, 5,700 soldiers have either died or are infected in action. During the 4 years of between 2078 and 2082, remember 82 is where it ends, in April, it's called the last kind of battle. It's called the last battle, sorry, not the last kind of battle, the last battle. They kind of nicknamed that 4 years because this is when the mutated infected began to perform an attack. So they were like, you know what, guys, we've all lost our minds, we're all infected, we're all kind of crazy, we're all zombies essentially, let's attack these guys strategically. And then the government, everyone was like, what the hell, these people are like, they're forming like formations, they're doing strategies, they're tricking us, they're setting traps. So this is like a smart attack, right? So this is the last battle, because the people, instead of like mindlessly like defending the building, they had to like actively like fight these guys. And then finally, in 2082, July, all 7 pillars are finished and the sanctuary is lodged. So they made the sanctuary and the pillars were like the last things that they were building, obviously. And then peace is finally achieved, whatever. In 2082 October, so a few months later, the people selected for Project Evaluate leave the cities. And in 2083, so a few months later, all communication is lost and they're presumed dead. And in 2092, a decade later, February, is the events of the book. Act 1. How are we doing, guys? So, Act 1 begins in 2092. So we got the prologue. So I'm just going to go through the characters as they're introduced in the story. So this is our protagonist. This is our main character, our POV, blah, blah, blah. So this is General Waverly Ace. She is 62 years old. 62, that's right. She's a miracle soldier. So physically, she is not 62. Her occupation, she's an ex-soldier. So remember, the war is over. There's a bunch of like veterans, blah, blah, blah. Well, she's a veteran. There's still like soldiers like defending the pillars or whatever, the military, blah, blah, blah. As you can see, she's got a scar. She's got a few scars. Oh, I forgot. Did I add these on? Or did I forget? Oh my god, did I not add this on? Yo, guys, I think I've forgotten to add a slide. Okay. I'll just add it after Miracle Soldiers. Let me just add this real quick. Bionic attachments. Surely I did it. Maybe I have. Okay. So bionic attachments, right? Let me just go back to healer soldiers. No, miracle soldiers, yeah. So a lot of people with bionic attachments, they aren't all miracle soldiers, but a lot of miracle soldiers have bionic attachments. So bionic attachments are essentially they're essentially cyborgs. Okay, essentially, so technology, it's been like 60 years in the future, and for us, like obviously in 2022, a lot more years in the future, a whole decade more in the future. So technology is like advanced. Again, this is like a futuristic sci-fi, like zombie themed story. So there's bionic attachments. So basically it's like your cool like robot arm, robot leg, blah blah blah. So basically it'd be like to save soldiers. If they got like stabbed or something, they would essentially be like brought in to the pillars where a lot of the hospitals are, and they would basically just pull them in, cut off that arm, and that's it. They'll just cut it off. They'll like really hurt, like they'll cut off as much of you as they can try without killing you, and attach a bionic attachment in place. So a lot of soldiers will have like, you know, a robot finger, robot hand, robot arm, you know, robot ear, you know, like so all that sort of stuff, right? Like if you got shot, they would have to like try to disinfect you by cutting off all that flesh. So like that's like your final attempt. Except like it takes like I don't know if I put the timeline. Surely I put the timeline on here of the infection rate, because I remember, if I remember correctly, it takes about half an hour. Like the first half an hour, you got a good bet that you can cut it off and you'll be fine. But after half an hour, it really does start to spread really quickly, and so you're already kind of like gone by the time it's half an hour. Like after half an hour, like it's going to be really hard to like cut all that off, like amputate any infected areas. And then after maybe 2 to 3 days, is when like you start like really like losing your mind and stuff like that. Although like I think it's after maybe an hour and a bit, or I think it is after the half hour is where you pass out and you just can't wake up because your like brain is going through like shock and stuff like that, and you start like sweating and stuff like that. And then after 2 or 3 days from like being passed out, you like wake up and you're like a zombie now, and you're like violent, all that. So those are what the bionic attachments are. Obviously, you got to be exposed to the virus and stuff. So that's why a lot of miracle soldiers do have bionic attachments, but not all people who have bionic attachments are miracle soldiers. Now let's continue on. I don't know if I talk about the cleansing process, but I will if I get to it and I realize I have forgotten it, putting it in the slides. So anyway, so yeah, you see Weber's got a scar on her face. So I'll tell you what that means. She was born in 2030, which is 2 years before the epidemic started. Her father was diagnosed with stage 1 at the very beginning of the disease, and her mother ended up being diagnosed with stage 2 a few years later. Obviously, they both died. Yay. She was orphaned. And she just basically followed people to evacuation centers. She was a bit older by then. And, you know, obviously a lot of people were orphaned, so she's just surviving with these, like, people who are, like, going towards evacuation centers. When she turned 19 exactly, she enrolled in the army to protect and fight while the infected while, like, the cities were being built. And that's when she became a miracle soldier. When you get diagnosed, they diagnose you at whatever age you realize, wait a second, I don't look old anymore. And then they try to, like, pinpoint exactly when you, quote unquote, got, like, infected / became the miracle soldier. So for her, it's about when she was 19. She's been alive for 62 years, but her body is still around this 19-year-old, because your body stays the same age when you're infected. She fought for 32 years until the war ended, so about half her life. And she, at the point of the story, is the oldest miracle soldier, and the only, along with Otis Carson. So there are only 2 miracle soldiers left as of 2092. There's only 2 miracle soldiers left, and it's her and Otis Carson, because all the others became infected because they're sleeping. The miracle cell essentially like exploded and it infected them from the inside out. Here are her bionic attachments. So she got her first one on her left leg under the knee. Her second one was her left arm above the elbow, and then her third one was her right leg mid-thigh down. Her fourth and her last one was her shoulder, neck, and half of her face. So like half of her neck, her shoulder, or going up to like half of her face. And she only managed to survive this one because of her miracle cells, because she could regenerate quite well, and like because of the miracle cells, and essentially like, you know, having the body of a 19-year-old when she's 62. That's the only reason that she was able to survive the 4th amputation, because it was literally half a face, like body, bestie, like half a neck and shoulder, like She's partially deaf in one ear because of the amputation on her face. She can't hear in that ear, but she does have a bionic version attached that records the sound waves and are translated into a machinery where she's notified of the volume and other things like location, if it's a gunshot, bomb, distance, etc. So she's literally got like a robot shoulder, neck, half a face. Her bionic eye, because she doesn't have an eye, because that's half her face, remember, it contains HUD, which is like, it's a thing. It's like you can see like the little, like when you're playing a video game and it's got like the details on the screen, it's like that, but like on your glasses. But for her, it's like her actual eye. So she doesn't always need to look down at a bionic arm screen, because a lot of people, if you have a bionic arm, there's like a screen on it, like a touch screen or like a holographic screen, so you can like don't have to carry a phone or a tablet. But her eye has that as well, so she doesn't always need to look down. Her bionic eye can also lip read if she can't hear it. She's a skilled soldier, obviously, because she's been fighting for so long, because she's literally been alive for the entirety of the war. And she's very serious and also like keeps a lot to herself, because she's, mentally scarred and also physically scarred, and because of her like early and extensive exposure to like the violence and everything. And she's very like not empathic, like not empathic. Like she's like immune to like the death of people. Like if people get infected or die, or like other soldiers or a teammate, she like really doesn't like necessarily care that much, because she's like done it so many times. She's just used to it. Like she'll meet you and be like, bestie, like I can see you dead right now. I don't. She's a survivor. Like she's like survived this long. She's a survivor. She's literally like fought in this war each time and survived. And she will basically do anything for the greater good, even if it means the death of some people. Again, it's she doesn't really not necessarily care about the people, but that like it's a greater good. Like there's nothing you can do about it, kind of thing. Like it is what it is in mentality. She's chaotic good. You should pretty much do anything to make sure that the majority of the people are okay. This is kind of important later for the plot. Like she will do anything. She's known to change mission plans halfway during like the mission and be kind of reckless, like just to like again just get the mission done no matter what, basically. And she's good at working in a team if she's the leader, again, because she needs to be making those decisions, doing like she needs to be able to sacrifice basically her team. She needs to be able to have that decision. So again, this is the final battle in 2082, with the final construction on the pillars. So yeah, in the last 4 years of construction, the infected decided to destroy an attack, as I can said, and this caused a lot of sacrifices to take them out. So like a lot of people died in this 4-time period, like a lot more than the previous years. It did extend the building time because the pillars were almost done, but it ended up taking 2 years longer because of this attack, and lots of people died from sacrifice or infection. So during one of these missions, the last ones, like the very last, like the last few days, I call the characters by their last name because that's what you kind of do in the military. So Ace, Waverly Ace, her team is wiped out basically in one of these last missions, and they need to basically like the last few missions are to like clear out the infected, because they gathered like a bunch of inventory and stuff because they were being smart and strategic. So they had to like detonate a bunch of bombs in this warehouse because there was a bunch of supplies in there that the infected was stealing. So on this mission, this is the prologue, remember. During this mission, she bumps into Otis Carson, right? She doesn't really know him yet. This is the first time she's met him, who's on a different team, completing a different mission. And his team had also like been killed out. Again, this is a very like brutal battle, and she's telling him to like leave, right? Because she's gonna blow up this warehouse, and he basically refuses because he's like, my sister is still here on one of the like in this warehouse, and she's like to him, literally leave, this warehouse is about to explode, but he's like no, and goes and fights his sister, and Ace just kind of leaves and the warehouse just explodes. And she's a general, she's like one of the higher ranks, and at this point I think he was a captain or something. I'll probably talk about it here. So this is Otis Carson. He's 50 in 1902. He's a miracle soldier and he's an ex-soldier. So he has a full bionic arm attachment, so like full with shoulder down, kind of like Bucky Barnes. He fought for 19 years. He entered like very late. He's currently 50 years old, but his body is about in the 20s. He suffers from extreme PTSD. Again, a lot of these people have mental health issues, obviously. He's got extreme PTSD, like straight up. His younger sister was in the war with him, but she was one of the ones that died during the final battle, and she dies in that warehouse when Waverly Ace, basically kind of due to her team as half failure, she managed to detonate it and complete the mission, but it was like kind of sidetracked and all that, and so technically it was Waverly Ace's team's mission bomb that blew her up and killed her essentially in that warehouse when she first met Otis. So he blames Waverly Ace for his sister's death, technically. His parents also died, but he remained young and stuff like that because of the miracle. And he lives in the sanctuary. He got that thing because he's also like the only miracle soldier left, along with Waverly Ace, so he lives in the sanctuary. So he has extreme PTSD, and after all, he keeps to himself. He was kind of by himself. He doesn't talk to anyone really. He doesn't fight at all anymore. He like refuses to like be involved anymore, and he freezes up a lot. Like he just like can't move. Like he just freezes if he like is confronted with anything. He's a neutral good, so he's like willing to break some rules to do what's right, but he like wants to make sure like no one gets hurt. Like he needs to make sure everyone's okay. But he's very much driven by fear and bad memories. You gotta love some good old trauma. So yeah, these are the lots. So this is, I think, the chapter 1 or something at this point, or not. Perhaps, I don't know. This is still the prologue backstory, but there's not much of a linear story here. So so basically the next day. Oh, this is still the prologue, right? Because this is still 82. This is 2082. The next day after this failed or this successful mission, basically during on the radio and stuff, people are like, oh my god, there's the last few missions, and Ace is going to go report with duty. She's a general who's got some stuff to do. Well, she bumps into Otis, right? And she's like, whoa, I thought you died, right? She's kind of surprised, but she finds out that his sister didn't make it, but he did, and that's when she finds out that he's a miracle soldier as well, because they're like in the checkup hospital section of the pillar, and he's like, oh, what are you doing in this section? He's like, I'm here to get my checkup on my miracle soldier cell, and she's like, oh, me too. By 2092, as I said, those two are the only remaining miracle soldiers left, and they require a monthly checkup in the sanctuary at the doctor's, because all the other like previous miracle soldiers, as I said, they were all exterminated because their miracle cells activated and they got infected inside out. So they have to like get checked up since these are the only ones left, just in case, just to make sure their cells are okay. You know what I mean? Quinn Harper is another character. So she's a friend of Waverly Ace from their childhood. So Waverly doesn't have that many friends, but obviously because a lot of them have died out, etc. You know, either from age or from the war. But Quinn Harper is one of her friends from when they're younger. So she joined the army when she was about 20 and served for 31 years. She has a bionic arm from the forearm down. So Ace usually ends up being assigned on her team, especially during the final battle, like those years, because their teams, like essentially, like you'll be in a team, sign a mission, you go on this mission, half the team would die, and the remaining members will have to get reassigned to different teams, and that would happen like every team was just a mix of a bunch of teams, you know what I mean? So on the battlefield, this is like after this Otis event. This is still the prologue kind of era because it's still 82. They end up like being reunited kind of, and like, oh my god, we're assigned on the same team for this final mission. And on the battlefield, they have to do a bunch of things, but then they have to leave, basically go back to the pillar. But a bunch of events cause them to be detoured, including a bomb going off and causing them to separate. Ace's bionic leg is damaged, and when she goes and finds Harper's been attacked by a bunch of the infected. So while they're fighting, though, Ace is cut. And as soon as it is, the small slit on her arm almost immediately heals, like Deadpool style. Like this, like miracle soldiers can heal pretty fast, and like they can they're less susceptible to the virus. You know, kind of like how Ace can manage to survive that 4th bionic attachment and stuff, all that sort of stuff. But it shouldn't be like you cut yourself and it immediately heals. You know, again, Deadpool style. That's not how that works, right? So she's like, wait, what? And then distracted, Harper gets hit and falls. So then they're like kind of fighting. They're struggling. The two of them are kind of hurt. They managed to get Harper's been hit. I think she got shot. I think that's what that means. And they managed to get to the pillar doors. Then they find out that the infected have cut the wires again, like on the thing. Again, they're smart, remember? So the cameras can't recognize their entrance. And so Ace is still fighting them off. And at some point, the guards notice them and they let them in. Harper's taken to be operated on. Again, they've got like the 30-minute window, and Ace has to be deep cleaned because her suit was compromised. She doesn't tell anyone about the fast regeneration. She doesn't tell anyone that her cut like healed immediately. So being deep cleaned basically is you kind of have to be cleaned anyway when you return. So when you go to the pillar entrance, you take off all your suit and then you enter like a little shower thing, like kind of what they do in like post-apocalyptic movies where you get like a little shower, like chemicals and steam and stuff like that. But if your suit has been compromised, like if it's been cut, even if you weren't cut, just because like the mask has like a special area, so then like even if you were compromised, like you shouldn't have breathed anything in. But again, just in case they pump you with a bunch of chemicals, like they make you breathe a bunch of chemicals to try and kill the virus inside you if you breathe it in, and they can either like cleanse your body just in case. But that's what that is. Then after that, Ace visits Harper in the medical center, and she's like, they had to amputate her leg because of the shot, and they're like still building the leg, and then that's when Ace finds out that Harper has volunteered for this mission, this project, but Ace knows about it because she's a high clearance and it's Project Evaluate. And Harper explains how she ended up deciding to volunteer because she figured there's nothing else she knows how to do except fight, because that's what they've been doing for literally like 30 years, you know. And then that's when they all find out, like the whole city's that's the end of the war because the pillars have been finished, like the fences have been like finalized, and that's the end of the war. So that's 10 years ago. So 92 is the beginning of the book or beginning of the story. 2092, this is 10 years after the war has ended, and it's like peace. It's like normal life. So it begins with the appointments. So basically Waverly is now a retired soldier who lives in the underground. She lives kind of like in the underground, just there's more interesting in the section because she just doesn't want to be up there, because it looks like, because again she's been surrounded by, you know, all this horror, this death, like dystopia for so much of her life that going to like the sanctuary, which is literally called the sanctuary, like different, right? So she prefers to be in the underground. Really the only exciting thing is literally her monthly visits to the sanctuary because she's like doing something. So every time she goes, she misses Otis by a few minutes because he ends up going earlier than like the allotted times. They end up like not talking to each other, and she doesn't really know why he's avoiding her, but just assumes he is because they keep missing each other for the past decade. Except this time she catches him but doesn't speak him. Like she sees him, but then because of that she's like incredibly more sus, and she's like, what's going on? It's been like a decade, right? We haven't even talked since like that time I killed your sister essentially by accident. Not really my fault. She didn't even know she did, really. So she does a little snoop, and as she's about to leave, she hacks into the hospital system with his like her bionic arm, which is like a little computer, and then he hacks into the hospital system, and uses his psychological exam and like looks through the psychological exam results that he literally just took that day, to make sure that he's not losing his mind and been infected, and finds out that he blames her for his sister's death. And she's like, oh, I see, that sucks. Sorry, my guy. I can't really do anything about it. I didn't even know I killed your sister. Sorry. Anyways, after this, she's at a bar and after the appointment, and this is when she finds out a passed out woman in the corridor, because the underground is just rooms and corridors and just like open areas. It's like, yeah, instead of a hallway or an alleyway, it's a corridor. She scans her with the bionic eye and finds an ID, which takes her to her residency where she lives. She finds out that the person passed out is called Allison Courtney. She takes her home where she finds her daughter, Tegan Courtney. Basically she's like, hey, found your mother, lol. So then furthermore, later in this chapter, Ace is in her residence when her bionic eye catches like an X-ray kind of like view and realizes that a support beam in the marketplace, which is like sort of near her like residence, which is like this slightly bigger open area, that it's about to fall basically because the support beam is like breaking because again it's old. So she runs down to evacuate the marketplace because if it falls into the marketplace and a bunch of people die. And then trying to evacuate people around it, like in the residences, because you know people are going to die if it falls. She managed to get a lot of people out, and then obviously the residences, like the literal like houses, start to fall, because again this is like a massive like structure. And at one point a family is stuck trying to get the child out of the bedroom, but like room has like disconnected from each other, and like the child is like, dangerously dangling off. Oh no, what are they going to do? So Ace goes up to help and ends up saving the child, but the building isn't able to hold her. So she ends up falling good many feet in the marketplace before. Like, I think I calculate 20 or 40 feet. Like, it's a lot of feet. She should have died, basically. A miracle. So Ace wakes up in a laboratory with only a broken arm. You know, falling all that. Only a broken arm. She finds out that she can't walk, but is interrupted by a scientist named Remington Gray. I love this guy, Gray, Dr. Gray. He tells her that, like, all, like, fanatically and excitedly, because he's young, okay? I'll go to his profile in a bit, but he's young. He's, like, all excited and, like, inspired that her cells are working in a revolutionary way. But then she goes, it's alright, it's fine. She tells him that she's used to, like, young scientists, like, freaking out because of her miracle cells, and that everyone's tried to find a cure with them and failed. You know, she's lived through this 1,000 times. And he's like, no. Your cells are different, right? He thinks that it's been mutated even more or, like, reacted somehow differently than, like, all the other miracle cells. And he explains how she survived the fall and her cells are regenerating fast. Because, like, remember, like, the miracle cell shouldn't, like, Deadpool regenerate, you know what I mean? And he's, like, talking about how her spine was, like, fractured, but, like, now it's working even though it shouldn't be, and that she's gonna, like, he's estimating at this rate you're gonna be able to walk in, like, an hour or two, and that's, like, impossible. And he wants to tell, like, the government, everything, this is a scientific breakthrough, and this could literally be a cure, since, like, other miracle cells, like, didn't used to regenerate as fast as hers, but she's, for some reason, is. Then he finally admits that he doesn't have all the abilities to find a cure because he's only a basic pathologist and mechanic from the underground. He doesn't actually have, like, all the facilities or the abilities to, like, properly, like, work out if she can actually be a cure, blah, blah, blah. But he knows that something's up, right? They should at least check it out. But he explains that he thinks, he's, like, pretty sure, like, little conspiracy theory, that the Pillars have a secret facility for theoretical research where scientists who, like, know all this stuff can help. Because remember, like, all researchers have been banned, even theoretical research. And that scientists that know all this stuff shouldn't, like, really be practicing anymore. But apparently he thinks there are. So Ace, like, is, like, skeptical. She's like, nah, it's okay. Like, again, she's very skeptical. She's very pessimistic. She's been doing this for years, decades. But then when he mentions this, she's like, wait a second. Because she remembers the ID card that she scanned of Alison Courtney from that passed out woman a few days earlier. Realized that the marriage partner of the ID card had a suspicious profession code. Because each like, profession, like, if you have a job, it has, like, a code at the end. So you could be, like, if you're an engineer, like, the ending code might be, like, 616. So then your code would be, like, your worker code would be, like, 7943616, right? So the ending is like that. You're a mechanic, so you can look at it and be like, oh, you're a mechanic, right? But Ace is saying that the marriage partner of Alison Courtney had a very suspicious one because I'll explain in a minute, because hers and Gray's ends with 1262 because they work for the government, right? But the ending of the husband on the IT card was 7723, which belongs to a non-existent profession. And so she was like, wait a second, this kind of matches up with your weird conspiracy theory. So she's like, wait a second. So she keeps going through, like, her system, the system basically that she has access to, and she finds more ideas with the same, like, weird error, all of which work in Pillar 7, but with no actual profession, further supporting Gray's theory. So after much reluctance and stuff, Ace is, like, finally persuaded by Gray to try and find the secret facility. So Remington Gray, he's 24, he's not a miracle soldier, and he's a scientist. So he's just 24, just plain old 24 years old. He's a biological disease scientist, a pathologist. He's 24 years old, whose parents are from the sanctuary, but he moved to live in the underground. So he's, like, this new generation as well. Because remember, 24, this is, like, well into, like, the pillars having been built, like, as in, like, underground and the same. Like, you know, he's this new generation that's living. So he moved down to the underground to help and work with the middle classes. So he's a hygiene. He works on vaccines and medicines for emerging diseases and, like, monitoring diseases. And he works with, like, minor disease control and stuff like that. And he's very curious with all that. And also, like, because everything's banned again for quarantine. and he's like curious and stuff like that, and he's very like interested in everything to do with Waverly Ace, whether that be biologically, scientifically, and even just her experiences and stuff like that. And he will do anything to save the people from the disease. He's chaotic good, quite like Waverly Ace again. Like he would do, yeah. So on the way there, actually, they bump into Otis unexpectedly in the pillars. And when they like interrogate him, they're like, Otis, what are you doing in these pillars? What are you doing? Sneaking around. And he finally admits that he was trying to find out where his monthly checkup files were going. And that's when they realize they're both looking for the same place. They're both looking for the secret pillar where theoretical research possibly could be happening, right? So obviously the test files of what Ace and Otis are obviously going to this place, right? So Gray explains to him the breakthrough and that he might also have this advanced miracle cell, but Otis thinks it's dumb and doesn't want anything to do with it, but they end up like caught up in it because Gray manages to hack into the ID check system and find the closed area, and that's when they find the secret facility. Alright, so sorry guys, I have to pause that for a bit because I have to go get tea because my throat is literally dying. Oh good, let's continue. Terrence Courtney. Terrence Courtney, at the time of the novel, is 39 years old. Again, he's like part of this newer generation, a bit older than Remington Gray, obviously. But he was part of the teams, some of the teams that used to be researching the miracle cell before he got like banned. So he was born during the war and so he became a scientist. After graduating at 23, he married his then girlfriend and had a child, Tegan, with her. So Tegan was the daughter, remember, that received her mother from Waverly when she was passed out. So after about 6 years, he got way too distracted with the work, doing more research on possible cures and everything, and then ended up working onto a doctorate. So he's Dr. Terrence Courtney. Allison, the wife, the woman that Ace found passed out on the corridor, was an ex-soldier, was a soldier. She served for 5 years and leaving to get married. And I think got to get that into perspective that a lot of people serve for like 5 to 10 years. They don't serve, like, even in our reality, people don't serve for like a terribly long time. So the fact that like Waverly Ace and even like Otis Carson, who have served like 30 years, like it's because like they have nothing else to do because they were born like before this, like they were like alive, like this is all they knew and that's all they like know, and they've lost everything, they lost their whole family, so like obviously they have nothing else to really live for except fight, but yeah. So Allison lived for about 5 years. Again, she's about the same age as Terrence, so she was born during the war. What's it called? And ended up becoming like an alcoholic due to the stress on their marriage and PTSD. Because again, Terrence was kind of like neglecting everything because he was too busy doing work and stuff. So when Tegan was around 7, the children got divorced and Terrence just disappeared. He just disappeared, gone. He actually went to a private research team studying the disease theoretically. So this is the secret facility that the trio, so Carson, Gray, and Ace are trying to look for at the moment. To the public, all theoretical study disease ended a few years ago because of new results. But he managed to convince his supervisors to allow weekly visits from his daughter without a mother's knowledge. While he's doing this, so that he can see his daughter, because it's supposed to be like a secret thing. But Tegan is there when Otis, Gray, and Ace infiltrate, which is, but oops, like I've met you before. Well, a new mission. So yeah, Ace recognizes Tegan from when she returned her mother, literally earlier, I think that morning or like the previous day. And there's a bit of like, we know each other. And then because obviously they use the ID to get there anyway. So Gray shows Dr. Courtney this advanced cell. Also them recognizing each other kind of like helps them, like the security not be like, security be like, who are these guys? And then Tegan like, wait, I know these guys. And then they'll be like, wait, what? So Gray shows Dr. Courtney this advanced cell, like a sample of it, and Courtney agrees that this is interesting. Like, like he's never really seen this before, and Gray wants to test them, but Courtney says that since all experimental tests have been shut down, not like the theoretical ones that were like shut down and brought back, kind of, the city just doesn't have the equipment. Like they physically just don't have the testing equipment for it, right? Because they banned it all, because they just can't risk an outbreak, and so the only equipment is at Building L, where failed Project Evaluate went, right? And no one's been there since, but the equipment is the only thing that could make a process, like a potential vaccine. Like it's the only thing that could process, create, or synthesize a potential vaccine. So they're all like, we need to go. But Otis disagrees. And just as he does, the lab goes into lockdown. This is his little profile on Tegan. So she's 16. She's a lot younger. She's like your YN. She's not a miracle soldier, and she doesn't have an occupation. So she was born literally just before the last battle. So she's this new generation. She lives in the underground with her alcoholic mother, ends up on the mission to find Project Evaluate. So she just like ends up there. She doesn't know how to fight, and she's kind of immature. Her father's Dr. Courtney, who the team consults on in early events of the novel. She just gets pulled into this mission. She's childish, she's curious. She kind of goes along with the plan, but she's like clumsy with the weapons and everything. She gets along well with her new teammates and stuff. She still has a lot to learn about being a team, though. She's kind of true neutral, but she's like tired. She's just like, bloody, I don't know what's going on. I woke up like 10 minutes ago. So after this, like, alarm goes off, right? Because just as Otis disagrees, the lab goes in lockdown. There's an announcement that basically says that a bunch of infected managed to enter Pillar 5. And so they made it into like Pillar 6 before it was completely eliminated. So the area is now quarantined. It's all fine, but the area is now being quarantined because there was a break-in. And so no one is allowed to go between these pillars, right? Or these levels on that pillar. So the army's taking care of guarding the broken door while they're trying to fix it, right? So Ace and Gray managed to hack into the systems and see what's going on. And it turns out that the infected are trying to perform strategized attacks again. Just like in the last battle where they lost a bunch of people, because these infected are actually really smart, especially if they were dead soldiers. So Gray, Otis, Ace and Tegan, and Dr. Courtney, they try to escape by going past the cards, but Dr. Courtney gets held back because he's like actually part of this team, and he tells Tegan to go home so she doesn't get caught up in the quarantine, because then you like go through the whole process of getting clean, blah blah, processed. So, but they try to get through the pillars, right, because it's all closed, and they manage to hide from like soldiers running to go fight, right, because it turns out they actually haven't like stopped them from, infiltrating. So they end up getting pulled in with them to the ground level of the pillar, where they find where they end up stealing a truck that soldiers go into the battlefield. And Tegan is pulled into the truck as well because she has nowhere else to go because she was trying to escape with them from the quarantine. And Otis is also annoyed now because he's also stuck on this mission. So they end up taking the truck, which is optimized for battlefield, so it has like big chunky tires and like spikes and everything and weapons. And they end up deciding to go to Building L since they're already in this truck. Act 2. Ta-da! So, Building L. Can you hear my water? Christ, anyways. So, this is a 40-hour journey to get to Building L, so it's a few miles away. And they encounter some problems, some minor attacks, insert some like miscellaneous plot here. When they arrive, they see the truck that Project Evaluate went on in the entrance. And so they're like, oh, okay, so Project Evaluate made it to the thing. Because remember, they lost contact, but they know now that they made it to the building. So they get their guns out and the suits up, and they realize that the entrance is forced open, and there's a bunch of infected corpses around, like they're dead. So they go around the building, they look for survivors or equipment, and they find a lot of like infected, but they kill them, and they split up, right? So Otis and Gray join, and Tegan and Ace. So quickly, so this is like, okay, so they find survivors, right? This is like the other half of the team. So the first half of the team is Otis, Gray, Tegan, and Ace, okay? So 2 miracle soldiers, the scientist, and the 16-year-old, okay? And now the other half of the main characters of this team are the Project Evaluate team, okay? Because surprise, they're still alive. So quickly, Otis and Gray find a live human, blonde, male, with supply. They think he's infected and he's about to like attack him, but then he fights back and they realize that, wait, he's human, guys. So they call Ace and Tegan to come back, and they go back to where this guy is. So his name is Caden, and he was one of the scientists that was sent on Building L. To Building L as part of Project Evaluate. They all learn about what happened. So they meet up with the other 2 survivors. So there are only 3 survivors from the team of 7, I believe it was. And they're called Elizabeth Ardell and Anders Paxson. So Anders only has 1 leg, and because they have to amputate it, like they don't just like quickly, because he got infected while he was defending the others, since he's the only soldier out of the 3 survivors. And he doesn't have a bionic attachment because, again, this was like in the middle of nowhere and they had to quickly amputate it. Elizabeth is another scientist. She developed schizophrenia and can only help Anders like maintain the bunker. She can't really do much else. And Caden learned to fight. because he was originally a scientist, and he only goes out for supplies, like from around the building. And they lost contact with the cities, and they can't go back because their truck is broken. And they managed to quarantine the upper levels of this building because the bottom obviously was destroyed because of the entrance and, infected. So basically what happened was there were 2 trucks that were sent to Building L, as well as like a bunch of equipment parts and stuff. And 3 members were in one truck and 4 members were in the other. So the truck with the 3 people had malfunctioned halfway through. And while they were trying to fix this truck, it was attacked. So 2 of those 3 members were killed, leaving Elizabeth the only survivor from that truck. So she went into the other truck. And then once they arrived at Building L, everything was fine except until the 7th hour when communications just died. They just stopped. And because the infected had broken the communication towers. Because remember, these guys are kind of smart, right? They realized something was up. One of the members died on that short mission to try and fix it because they went up to try and fix it, and one of them died. Then the other one, so the 2 of them went up. The other one that survived that little attack was Harper. Remember Quinn Harper, Waverly Ace's friend? So she went back down to tell the others that the infected are trying to infiltrate the building now, that people were inside. So there's just this empty building, and in fact they're like, oh, whatever, we don't care what to see. But the moment that there's movement, the moment there's noise, the moment there's people, they're like, wait, we want this building. So they're trying to infiltrate it now because there are people. And that's what Harper realizes. So that's when Ace finds out that Quinn was killed in action, because remember that her friend went on this mission and she just never heard from her again because communications was shot and they're presumed dead, and now that she 100% knows that she died. She actually reunites with Anders because they knew each other briefly in the military because they're the same age. I'll go through their profiles in a moment. Gray explains to Kate and Elizabeth about Ace's condition, and they're also astonished. Remember, those 2 are also scientists, and they must be good scientists if they were literally sent on this special mission by the government to research the infected. So Anders Pecton, he's 62 years old. He's the same age as Waverly Ace, I'm pretty sure. He's a miracle soldier, and he's also an ex-soldier. So he's a long-time experienced soldier, just like Waverly Ace. So yeah, same age as Waverly. He joined the army at 21 years old, so a bit older than Waverly when she joined. And he has a bionic stomach. So at one point while he was fighting, he probably got shot in the stomach, got infected, and they managed to cut it out and replace a bionic stomach. He's worked with Ace previously in the military. And he was on Project Evaluate, so they met up again. So he's more lawful neutral before becoming like more true neutral while realizing like the harsh of the world, and he can't really be lawful in such a condition. But he's always willing to put himself in danger to help people, and he will always be reckless to help others. He's also very selfless, but also very serious, and he likes to work alone, but he ends up having to learn how to help, with his friends to fight and stuff like that because they end up being survivors. So Caden Starr, he's now 36. He's a miracle soldier, so he becomes a miracle soldier, and he's a scientist. So he leaves the cities at 26 years old, and he's not a miracle soldier at this point. He's very quick at learning, and it's how he became one of the best scientists, blah, blah. So he and Elizabeth Ardell both left the cities at a very young age. They're, again, part of this new generation. But then both of them, Elizabeth and Caden, they become miracle soldiers from the exposure from the whole Project Evaluate debacle, like the accident and everything, that they became miracle soldiers because they became exposed to the thing. And so now they are miracle soldiers. So he's 36, not that old compared to the other ones, the other miracle soldiers, but he's still, a miracle soldier, and he's actually got the body for a 26-year-old. So yeah, he's neutral good, and nowadays he would step out to fight and help his friends. Before he wouldn't because he didn't know how to fight, but now he does because he's like the only one, because Anders is kind of disabled and Elizabeth is schizophrenic. He can work in a team very well. Now Elizabeth Ardell, she's 29 at the moment, and she was 19 when she left the city, so she was a lot younger. But she's incredibly smart. So she's again very young. She's born in the last decade of the war, so she's part of this new generation, and part of this very specific generation where parents shielded their children from the horrors of the world. So because of this, but still, she became a scientist to study the horrors of the world and just disease and everything. So she only knew about it all like in theory, right, and stuff like that. So she put on a special mission, the Project Evaluate mission, because she was just really smart and stuff. And she knew it all about in theory, but then she was exposed to the traumatic experience of basically just watching her teammates die in front of her. because this ended up triggering schizophrenia, because basically like she believed that, I mean, she knew that the world kind of sucked and everything because everyone was dying, but she didn't actually like properly know what it was until she literally witnessed it in front of her. So she was 19 when she left. She's lawful good. So she will do anything to help her friends, even if she can't succeed, but she just like can't physically do it anymore. She can't fight. She's afraid of the infected. So when she isn't in denial of their existence, because her schizophrenia is made to believe that like they're not in a pandemic, and then they're not in an apocalyptic wasteland. They're not in a zombie apocalypse. You know what I mean? When she's not in that kind of phase of her schizophrenia, she's like afraid of the infected. She just can't do anything, but she will try her best to help and fight. And she is the mother of the group because she thinks that she's just like looking after her friends in this bunker for no reason. So testing. So at this bunker at the building L, they begin testing. They're getting some infected samples and injecting them into open wounds, into an open wound that they open on Waverly A. So they're doing like kind of unethical like testing, but they don't really have a choice, right? And A's like volunteers, so it's okay. So she goes into shock when they do this and goes unconscious, but she doesn't show any normal symptoms of being infected. So they're like, wait, this might actually have something. So basically they just gave her a wound and put some of the disease in her, just plain open disease, and left her. And she goes into shock, but she's okay because she doesn't seem to be getting infected. So they're like, ooh. You're just going to hear that. I'm sorry. I'm not going to edit this. It's too long. So separately, another point in the story, Elizabeth and Ace actually have a conversation about war, life in Building L, and trauma. Except later it's revealed that Elizabeth hallucinated the whole thing while she was looking after Ace, who was still unconscious. But it like gives insight on what was going on. Ace ends up waking up and she's completely healed. So everyone's like, bestie, what? What? You're completely, you literally, what? So Caden takes some samples from her and they begin like trying to make a cure and stuff, and Gray fixes the equipment that was destroyed because remember he's like a mechanic. Like he's not as like specialized as or as smart as Elizabeth and Caden, because they're like obviously they will pick like the best from the best to go on this team, and they're very specialized in the disease, whereas Gray is a lot like he's pretty very smart still, but like lesser than them. So he's also an engineer, so he's fixing this equipment that was like destroyed and been 10 years since they were like made to be used. And after a few days, the three scientists, they managed to figure out a basic blueprint for like a possible vaccine or whatever, and put into a data pad, right? But it still needs to be processed for it to all work out, right? Like to all work out like the equations and the technicalities and all that for it to even like be viable. But it's still like a blueprint. This is still something that like the three best minds in this, finding a cure could make. And then a small group of them end up going out to see if they can communicate with the cities, right? They don't actually respond or find like any communication, but they end up finding a TV broadcast instead, right? About an attack. And that's when they find out that since they've been gone, it's been a few days, the city has 5 out of 7 broken pillars. The guard doors are broken. One of them is still trying to be contained, and the other 2 pillars haven't been broken yet, but they're being attacked. Both cities are in quarantine, and more soldiers are being enlisted to help fight. And they're like, oh, that's not good. So they take this message to the others, and it seems that basically the infected are doing another strategized attack, which is not good. They all debate on whether or not to go back. Ace says that they should go back and fight because, she and Otis are like the only experienced soldiers, but Kaden says that they need her. They literally just need her to get a cure. And so, but they all finally end up agreeing that they all should probably go back. So when they're traveling back home, Caden and Anders, because they've been surrounded by these infected for a very long time, they comment that the infected are acting kind of funny, right? Because they've been studying for 10 years, and they realize that they seem to be heading towards a beacon, like moth to a light. And they realize that that's probably because of all the action that's happening a few miles away, i.e. the battle against the cities. They actually don't encounter any problems on their way back because there aren't that many affected around anymore for some reason, because they're all at the pillars. They're all fighting. So when they get there, they find that actually, as they approach the cities, they find familiar camps, like little tents and like campfires and stuff, literally, that these infected have created, which Ace actually recognizes from her last days in the last battle. This is very similar. So they actually stop the truck and they're trying to work out how to get inside one of the pillars, because remember, people are trying to defend the infected from getting inside, so there's no way they're going to let them inside. So this is where we get a bit of an oop, like what am I going to do? I don't know. swallows. Anyways, so I don't actually know what ending I want because I have two sort of similar outputs. So I'm gonna give you both of these endings. Again, very complex. I don't know what I'm doing. This is ending 1. So in ending 1, their final plan is to basically just attack them. They put the specialized truck, remember this is like a battle truck, on attack mode, which basically ejects spikes at the front and basically just rams through and dropping bombs around the back as they go along. So they basically try to destroy as many infectors as they can as they get into one of the broken pillars because it'll be easier to get inside. So they manage to get there and manage not to like destroy anything terrible on the way. And then when they get there, they demand to speak to the government, and they manage to make it, right? Because again, they're the only 2 miracle soldiers alive, blah, blah. And the government doesn't believe they found a cure, so they demonstrate. Like they literally demonstrate. Like they probably like stab Waverly with the infected, and she's fine. So the government actually lets them have a lab and work with a small team of scientists to try and find a cure, including Dr. Courtney. So Tegan like goes with her parents again. Her mother's also there, but she kind of ignores them and ends up going back to the battlefield because she's an ex-soldier. So she's going back to fight because she's like depressed probably. Otis doesn't want to fight, but he finally like reluctantly decides to be an instructor to do many new soldiers, and Anders joins him as well. And Tegan is like mad at her parents at all this. This all happens kind of within 3 hours. Obviously Tegan's mad because like her mom's like, LMAO, just saw you after literally you disappeared for a few days for no reason, and I'm gonna go fight some zombies now. Bye. Anyway, so the battlefield. So they're working and fighting together, and Tegan actually finds out that her mother is in a group that's being attacked right now and basically just being slaughtered near this 3rd pillar. So she wants to go out and help her, but Ace is like, bestie, it's too dangerous. It's useless to go out there and try to fight. And basically, it's like a mirror. She basically repeats the words that she told Otis in the last battle when he was going to try and save his sister. And Tegan agrees with her, but then when Ace wakes up from a blood transaction, because they're still trying to find a cure, remember, she finds Tegan gone. And so her father's like, yo, where's Tegan? She's been gone for a bit. And Ace is like, wait, oh, great. And realizes that she's gone to help her mother. So her father's worried and goes after her, and Ace tries to stop him, but Dr. Courtney runs off to try and find Tegan into the battlefield with no suit or protection. Great idea. Because again, these pillars are like broken, so the systems aren't like properly working. So he goes out, he just grabs a gun and runs it out. Ace runs after him, but stops before leaving the broken pillar. Like she's going after like, bestie, wait. But then she's like, wait, there's no point. And just kind of watches, knowing that they will probably die. So Dr. Courtney goes into the ruins of the small building where Tegan's mother is, basically just to find her body in a corner, and Tegan, who's suited up and everything, with another soldier, and they're fighting. The soldier tells Tegan that they need to leave or else they will die, but Tegan refuses. She gets annoyed, but then her father comes and draws the gun. Her mother basically, she was infected and her suit was damaged, so she's breathing in the disease. The infected around them are fighting, has some stolen grenades, and they're about to use them. But then Ace jumps in, killing all of the ones that are on that level of the small building. So, yay, she comes and saves them, sort of. She gets the soldier out and manages to convince Dr. Courtney that they'll be right behind them. So, soldier and Dr. Courtney leave, but Tegan doesn't want to leave her mother, but she's waking up from being unconscious, infected. So, it's been like half an hour since, or a few hours, I guess, I suppose, because it's been a while since they returned. So, Ace tells her that there really isn't any hope for her and they need to get back. And a lot of the infected now surrounding them, so Ace forcefully pulls Tegan away, despite Tegan wanting to save her mother, but they can't do anything about it. So the infected corner them in a lower level, and Ace manages to take them off with some guns. But then she manages to break a hole into the floor, and they land on the ground level, because they're in this little building thing in the battlefield. And they begin to run towards the pillar, but then Ace is like taking down the zombies as they go, and they manage to get to a secure pillar and get cleaned. And while they're inside, Ace gets mad at both Tegan and Dr. Courtney about what they did. Otis mentions why she even went out there in the first place, and she's like one of the most important people right now. Why would she risk getting killed for such a meaningless lives? And he's like quoting, like he's been sarcastic. He's like quoting them, like meaningless lives. What Ace says to him at the end of the last battle about his sister, and what she says to Tegan before. So she kind of gets angry at him and leaves. So decisions. So Ace wants to go back to her residence, like to her home, but she isn't allowed to go back to the underground if she's in the sanctuary, because remember, it's quarantine. And so she's stuck in the pillars unless she has a clearance. So she she shows her like her ID, and they're like, you can go to the sanctuary but not the underground. So she gets annoyed and is about to leave when the wall behind it blows up. And so through the chaos, she finds out that the infected bombed the base of the pillar, and the cities are becoming unstable. Because, like, think about it, the pillars break, the sanctuary literally falls. It's the only thing that's holding it up. And if the city falls, it falls onto the underground and basically destroys that as well. So she goes to a control panel and finds out that Grey had left with the final parts of the vaccine to the underground to process it in his lab. Because remember, he works in the underground, as the labs and the pillars of the sanctuary didn't allow his clearance, and the government was too busy to give him a higher one. So he had to like go to his own lab to try and process this vaccine. So she goes to the crowd to find someone or anything, but she bumps into Kate and Elizabeth. So this is when like time is getting short. Like this is like minutes. Before it was like hours, now it's minutes. So she bumps into Kate and Elizabeth, and she orders Kaden to go downstairs to the underground to somehow help Grey, since she's like alone down there. And she takes Elizabeth to the sanctuary to try and speak with the government. Anyways, spoiler, they all die. Yeah. Anyways, so Ace leaves Courtney, the two Courtneys and Otis, while Tegan defies the filing and ends up going back out to fight into the battlefield. She just needs to do something. You know, she's 16, she needs to do something while the world's literally ending, you know. The final paradise is literally getting broken into and failing. So Otis ends up following her with the team and a team with these new recruits, and Otis ends up going out there, and in the end he ends up saving her from a falling building, basically a falling communications tower that the infected like destroyed, and he just dies basically. He sacrifices himself to save Tegan, and it's like, I guess, symbolic because he couldn't save his sister and Tegan's like younger, blah blah blah, I don't know. So he dies, whoops. Anyways, on the way to the sanctuary government tower, Ace finds that the situation is much worse, since some of the pillars aren't even being secured, and just like the infected are just like walking in. They're just waltzing in because they aren't even being secured into the underground and the sanctuary. And so there's just infected just walking in the sanctuary. They're just in there, like they can't do anything about it, right? Because there's not enough people to fight. So in the process of all this, Elizabeth is infected, and Ace takes her up to the top government control room, where she finds all the officers dead, and there's a bunch of infected there because they just got ambushed, I guess. And they had strategically aimed for the heads, so like the infected are like straight up just assassinating all these people. And Ace just takes them all out and lays Elizabeth, who by then has passed out from the disease, and just puts on the ground in this control room and locks themselves in there. So she's in the control room, and she can speak through Grey through the comms and the security cameras. And this is like kind of sad. I mean, they all died, but this is kind of sad. So they're speaking each other through these comms, and she can see Remington through, like Grey, through the cameras as he's working in the lab. And Caden never arrives to Grey. He obviously went down to help, but he just never gets to him. And he turns out he was killed on the way down there, as the levels of the underground are basically collapsing on each other. Because remember, literally this all started because Waverly fell off this building because the beams were breaking because they were so old. Like, the whole thing's just falling down. And so he never gets there, so Caden dies like that. So Grey is almost done processing the vaccine in the control room. And so Ace connects her bionic arm to the machine, for like the computers, and so it's copying into a hard drive that Grey has, so it's processing, and it's also copying into her arm. It's like it's all one mainframe. And all of a sudden, the voice comms are disconnected. So Ace can only watch through the security cameras as Grey looks up at a door in worry, and then walks off the screen in panic. And after a while, the room shakes and the camera falls to the floor. So Ace doesn't know if he's alive or not, but she thinks that something's gone wrong, obviously, because so she tries to communicate with anyone else through the comms, but like no one's responding. And Elizabeth is falling in and out of consciousness because she's infected, obviously. And Ace ends up holding up her blaster and shooting her dead. Better dead than a threat is her motto. So in a flash, she notices a halfway done command, and that's when she realizes that it's a self-detonation for the cities. Basically, she's unsure why on Earth there's a self-destruction button for the cities, but then she realizes that she could use it right there and there. She could realize that she could literally just destroy the cities. So that's probably why there's a self-destruct in cities, just in case that they're going like infiltrated. But like, there's a halfway done command, which means the officers that were in there before her were literally planning to destroy the cities before they were completely killed off. And so she realizes that she could literally destroy the cities right now and just self-destruct, and no one will care because they'll all be dead. And the war had come back, and it's more helpless than ever because they were losing. So it's kind of helpless. and she activates it. She presses the button. It's more than a button, but you know. So the base of the pillars explode, all of them, and they all fall. The sanctuary is breaking apart, and the underground is essentially imploding. So Tegan, the way she dies, is after a few minutes that she realizes that Otis is dead, that he sacrificed himself for her. A bunch of debris starts falling from the sanctuary because it blew up, obviously, and it ends up ultimately killing her. Gray doesn't actually die when Ace thought he did when the voice comms went off and the camera fell. He ended up leaving because some infected were trying to break into his lab, but he went and ended up getting a mask and a weapon, but the infrastructure around him is breaking, causing him the room to fall, and because the underground is still dying. And so he ends up getting killed a bit later when an explosion from the pillar, from the self-destruction, caused a chain reaction of a really massive explosion in this underground. And he had already been stabbed by an infected when it happened anyway, but yeah. Paxton was in another control room trying to reach the head control room, unaware that the officers were already dead, so where Ace was. So he was with some others trying to like give out orders and stuff, trying to like create some control, but then when the pillars blew up, he got brief connection with the headquarters, but he met with silence, and he died when one of the pillars that he was in ended up collapsing. So Waverly Ace, she actually after she activates self-destruct, she manages to receive a connection within the control room, hearing Paxton's voice. Because remember, she tried to find some communication, but no one was answering, so she figured everyone's probably dead. So she's in confusion and distress because she literally pressed a button that was going to destroy the cities. And so in that, she didn't reply. And in those few seconds, the connection cut and the room that she was in begins to fall. And that's when she realizes that around the room is a sort of escape pod. Obviously, because this self-destruction function activated it. So she stumbles into this little like escape pod room just as the sanctuary is like falling. Like it's falling to the ground. Because remember, it's like a hovering kind of like on these pillars. So her bionic arm detaches from the control thing that it was connected to before, and she falls into this escape pod and she passes out. And then on the screen on her bionic arm shows that the transaction had been completed, and that she is the only known survivor of the destruction of the cities because she's in this escape pod. And the transaction has been completed, which means the vaccine that Gray was processing managed to successfully transfer and process into her arm. So she has a copy of this potential cure. So this is everything wrong with that ending that I don't like. Cons. Self-destruct option, that's too dumb and coincidental, but like on the other hand, it's sort of not, because I can justify it, but like it's, I don't know. Waverly Ace is the only known survivor. Is that too main charactery? I don't know. Is it like too much? Like what? And then some characters aren't needed for the finale. So this is what kind of got me near the end. A few years after developing the story, I was like, wait a second. Give me a second. Some of these characters I don't actually need. And then I was like, ooh, what do I do now? Like, I mean, I like all the characters, and they're like, I don't know, I don't want to cut them. But like, anyway, so opposition. So a corrupt government. So I was like realizing that I didn't really have like an opposition apart from the infected, and so I was like, so like, then I was like, okay, corrupt government could kind of work because destruction at their hands is that like that could. So this is like opposition of like opposing these cons. So like a corrupt government could really actually work because that would explain why they would have like a self-destruct tool like at their hands, while they would have an escape pod. Like they could control a whole small population, like what's left of the world essentially. For the opposition of the Waverly Ace argument, main character is that who cares? I mean, the themes are consistent. Like she's the only one in her theme that thinks that death is better than becoming a threat. And she's the only one that survives in the end. And then I've got question mark for some characters aren't needed because I refuse to delete some of these characters. I don't know what to do. Alright, so continuing on. Ending 2. So this is a bit less detailed because it's relatively new compared to ending 1, which is like the one I had for a while. Then I was like, you know what, let's mix it up. What if I did this? But then I was like, I don't know which one to choose because they're both kind of good. So anyway, yeah. So these are just a few dot points. Hold on, what the hell? Act 2. Wait, is this an Act 3 ending? Oh, wait. Not Act 3. Okay, it's an Act 3, but it's okay. I'll get to that moment. So this is an Act 2 ending 2. So this is back in Building L. This is before they realize they have to go back to the cities. But basically, during this like tiny mission to like fix a generator on the lower levels, this is when Elizabeth and Ace go there because Ace doesn't know where this generator is that they need to fix. Elizabeth does, so they both go. But then Elizabeth gets infected and Ace kills her, and everyone is obviously distraught and actually angry with Ace because they're like, yeah, bestie, what? But obviously Ace has the thing. It's like a whole like moral dilemma between all the different characters because it's like better dead than a threat is Ace's morals because and her beliefs because that's what she's lived through. But everyone else, not so much. Anyways, on the way back home, like they are in ending 1, Ace somehow dies. Yes, that's right. I said I figure it out. I said it was less detailed, but she just somehow dies. Like she probably has to like jump out of the truck to help everyone or like distract the infected because they're about to get overwhelmed or something like that. On the way there as well, Paxton is infected on the shoulder, but they ignore it for now because again, the incubation period is kind of long. Apparently, I said half an hour, but it's probably a few hours. Let's be real. I can't remember exactly. I apparently didn't write it down, but I worked it out in my notebook somewhere. So immediately, so they don't go to the government this time. Gray immediately goes to the pathology division in the underground where he works, like his lab, to process the vaccine plan. Then Tegan and Otis go to the battlefield, which ends up with the same ending, same as ending 1, except this time Dr. Corney is killed in the small building when he goes and saves her, remember? And Tegan is forced to leave on her own accord this time because Ace is dead, remember, so she can't come and help. Paxton and Caden Starr, they go to the head control room. So remember, Paxton was in this control room, remember? But instead, this time, Paxton and Starr go up to the control room to tell officers that to basically be prepared for Gray's transmission when it's ready, when he's processed it. When they get there, they find HQ overrun. So they temporarily split up, like one of them goes down one hallway and one goes to another hallway because, again, it's infected again, it's just roaming around. Paxton heads to the control room, but Starr takes a bit longer to get there. And so Paxton actually leaves the control room to go look for Starr because he's taking a bit too long, and he finds him struggling to fight these infected that have swarmed him. So Paxton leaves them somewhere else, and when Starr finishes fighting like the 2 that were left behind, he finds Paxton on the floor fighting 2 infected. So Starr kills them off and argues with Paxton to keep going, like, let's go to the control room, but Paxton's like, you need to kill me, basically, like Elizabeth. And this is like a heartfelt, like, dramatic moment because he's like, you need to kill me, like Ace did to Elizabeth, because he's about to like go into the unconscious stage of the incubation period. But Starr like refuses because like they have like this almost like father and son, no, not more father and son, more like older brother younger brother dynamic because they've literally lived together for like 10 years. Like at the beginning when they first met, they were probably like kind of enemies to lovers, but like platonic. Where like they both like kind of don't like each other because Star's like a young scientist who's really dumb, whereas Paxton's like a reserved like soldier, and then they end up like obviously going through this traumatic event, everything where everything went wrong and a bunch of people died. And then Paxton literally got disabled defending them, and he had to like teach Starr how to fight and protect them, like the 3 of them and everything like that. And now he's like begging Starr to kill him, and he can't do it. So Starr can't kill him. And Paxton's about to like go into unconscious state and then, become infected and then actually become a threat to them all. So he's like, no. So Starr refuses though, and Paxton ends up shooting himself to not be a threat. So it's like a sad moment. Starr obviously upset. He goes into the control room and tries to contact Gray. So Starr's in the control room this time instead of Waverly because Waverly's dead. And he tries to contact Gray. So Gray's in the lab. He's all secure. He's fine. And he's processing the information. And there's a bunch of infected actually outside of the room trying to enter, but he's like secure at lab. Meanwhile, Tegan and Otis are outside in the warehouse, and Otis dies in a similar way as ending 1, saving Tegan from a bomb. But anyways, meanwhile, Starr can't contact Gray, so he tries to contact Tegan. And he's still like confused about Paxton's death. He's overwhelmed. And actually, he was infected a while back as well. Like they're all kind of like they get like cut and they like don't really realize it. But he knew he was infected because it was a kind of big cut. But he's starting to become a bit delirious as well. He's like kind of losing his mind a bit. And also he's like panicking. He's like stressed. He's like overwhelmed because Paxton literally just died. He just killed himself in front of him. Like he just shot himself. Tegan ends up replying and tells him about Otis's death. Because she's basically like, bruh, Otis just died. And Star's trying to comprehend it. But then Tegan's comms gets cut off from the communication dodginess. And so he thinks that she's been killed as well. So he thinks that So he knows that Paxton just died. He just killed himself in front of him. So that's already traumatic. Tegan just told him that Otis is dead, and then she gets cut off, and he's incoherent. He's like losing his mind. He's sick. And he thinks that she just died as well because the comms cut off. So he tries to contact Gray, but the communications still just aren't working. And so his deranged mindset just thinks that he's also dead because he can't contact him. So Star's vision is now blurring. He's kind of losing it. Then he notices some ID cards and a card in a slot in like the control panel, like a key holder, but with ID cards. And he realizes it's to activate the oxygen cleansing system. So his hand basically hovers over. So then it's a system that the cities have to like cleanse the air to make sure that like new oxygen is there, clean oxygen. So his hand hovers over the activation. But then but his frenzied brain is like fighting like to pass out because he's about to pass out, right? And it basically just activates it by accident. And this increased oxygen level in the city suddenly just activate a series of bombs that the infected have placed because they're trying to blow this place up, but instead it ends up premeditatively blowing up because of all this extra oxygen in the area, because of the shooting or the unstable like area and everything. And this ends up causing a chain reaction of destruction to the cities. It just ends up blowing everything up, including the pillars and the underground, and therefore the sanctuary, because it's been held up, and Star passes out and is killed. And this ending, I think, is cooler. It utilizes all of the characters better, which was a problem. Remember that table at the beginning? At the end of ending 1. If we go back to that table, so self-destruct option, that gets fixed because it's not actually a self-destruction option. It's just a oxygen cleansing system, which which ends up triggering the bomb system that the infected have placed. So it's not actually a self-destruct option. Like, it's not like a actual self-destruct option that a government placed. It's just the oxygen cleansing system that ended up causing a mass explosion. Waverly Yates is the only survivor. She ends up not being the only survivor and is in fact one of the first ones to die. The only problem with this is that she does die, and I don't really know how to do it, making it dramatic, because she is the protagonist. But then I could also make her not the protagonist and have all the cast of characters the main protagonist. Like, there's not just one, there's just a few, and she just starts out to be the main character. And they do have her DNA and the vaccine blueprint by then, so she technically is able to die and not having a major effect on the plot, as in like the fact that because they don't need her alive anymore at that point. And then the some characters that I needed for the finale actually works because in this version, the ending 2 is that they all are actually needed and they all have an impact. For example, like Elizabeth she doesn't just get randomly infected in the control room and dies and gets shot by Waverly. She actually dies earlier, and her death creates a moral qualm between all the characters, which then later gets brought up when Paxton has to kill himself. And that also makes Paxton a more important character because he's helping Caden get to the control room, and he also dies in a meaningful way instead of just dying randomly, like in ending 1. And Caden, again, he doesn't just randomly die. He's trying to go help Star. Gray, he dies. He's the one who activates the bomb. So, like, all the characters now have a purpose. So I actually quite like ending 2 better at this point. I don't know. Again, you guys can also tell me, just if you're here, if you're listening to this podcast, comment down below which one you prefer. I don't really know. I mean, the first one's the original one, and I kind of like some nostalgia to it, but then ending 2 obviously makes more sense, and it's actually kind of cool as well, but it's less, I guess, detailed because I haven't thought about it as much as the other one, which again was like years in the making. This is like me trying to fix stuff up. Now, Act 3 is the sequel story, or like a possible, this is like ending 3 extra ending, but there's just 2 different endings, ending 1 and ending 2. But anyway, let me just talk about this real quick and when it's done, basically. Act 3, ending 1. So this is like a possible what if. So Ace is the survivor, as we've seen. She actually wakes up in this escape pod, which is hovering over miles and miles of debris of the destroyed cities. Because remember, the sanctuary just fell, the pillar just fell, there's just debris everywhere, massive debris. And she actually notices that the transaction has been completed, and that she has the key to a possible vaccine, because the transmission Gray was trying to send worked. So this is the ending 1, remember, where everyone except her dies. She ends up, after 2 weeks, she just passes out from dehydration because she runs out of supplies in the pod. But then she ends up waking up in a ship. So it turns out another civilization had actually survived the initial nuclear bombings, because as the kind of England area, like Europe, had actually been making some Marines to survive against the infected, because sea creatures were relatively like not affected by this whole thing, whereas like livestock and stuff were kind of infected because like every living creature was like getting infected. But then because of the nuclear bomb and because of the miscommunication and just like all technology being like wiped out for a bit, no one had any idea these people were survived. So they ended up saving her because they detected this mass explosion just randomly in the US, and they were like, wait a second. So they went over to try and help and see what was going on. So she ended up, she is joined with a bunch of 4 other survivors. I don't actually know what that means reading this months later. I think this is just like either random survivors or other survivors around the world that this Europe team are trying to like save. And they're all starved and dehydrated, and all of them are found to be recent miracle soldiers. So all of them are like currently in the miracle soldier age because they just got infected, which is the only reason they survived. So I think it's more likely that these 4 survivors are people from the cities that are trying to survive. And one of them is Tegan Courtney. Wow. Ending 2. One of these is that Gray survives as well, including with Waverly. So while transferring, so when he dies, remember he dies trying to like from an explosion from the underground while also being surrounded by the infected. So while transferring the copy of the vaccine into the control room, he also had one transferred to a data pad. So there are 3 copies. There's one that was trying to go into the system that obviously was destroyed because the cities died, one that was going into Waverly, and one that now is going into one of his data pads. And the transaction failed, but he ended up grabbing the final successful data pad copy before exposure, so the one that is on his data pad, and he managed to notice the increased levels of oxygen. So I guess this is the ending 2 one. So yeah, when it's the one that Caden blows everyone up and Ace is already dead, so she's not a survivor in this. Gray is apparently. So he notices there's an increased level of oxygen, so he locks himself in a safe room in the lab, which is like a freezer that's like used to like store dangerous liquids and stuff like that, but he like chucked out those first. And before he locks inside, he injects himself with one of the remaining samples of Ace's blood. Unsure whether he survived this or not. Like he's got no knowledge, but he figures that this is like his best chance of survival if he had regenerative cells, especially like Deadpool level that Waverly seems to be having. And then I've got here just unsure if she survives or not as Tegan, because she can still technically survive with these points that she was a recent miracle soldier, that survived, and she's saved, because then Ray would have survived in this freezer room and been saved, hopefully by the European team. And that's the endings. That's the entirety. That is all 67 slides. That is the project evaluates plot, concept, history, and world building and characters. These are all my favorite characters. I actually have to, if I bring up my quote of accounts, God, this is embarrassing. My quote of account, I've actually got a quiz that you guys can do, and I will link it down below for you. If I just log into this thing, God, oh my God, it's so bad. Anyways, my profile, I've got this quiz. Hold on, let's just go back a bit. I'll link this down below so you guys can see it. Just don't look at my account, okay? I've got this, which character from Project Evaluate are you? So yeah, Project Evaluate's an original story about a post-apocalyptic world where a small team think they've found a vaccine to get rid of a disease that's put their world into a zombie-like survival state. The only problem is that they need to travel to a building where the equipment they need is stored. The team to complete this mission is called Project Evaluate. Made this in 2020. This is a while ago. So we've got this little quiz. You guys can take a look at it and see what character you are. I've got just a bunch of like situations. So like example, question 1, you're selected to become part of a team to find a vaccine against the zombifying disease. What do you do? Accept it, but put your own opinions a lot, talk to the leader, like you're just defiant, or you don't really want to go, but you don't say anything about it, so you do it anyway, you decline it, or you volunteer and become the leader, or you sit back quietly and nod along, whatever. So yeah, I've got a bunch of questions here. So these are all of the questions here, and you can submit it and find out what character you are and what you would do, because all of these characters, they all have a thing. If I actually go into the edit, I can actually talk about each character, because I just think this is very cool. All of the answers, your results. So if you end up with it just tells you what things you do. This is what are in the profile thing. So yeah, It just tells you, like, if you did more Waverly Ace things, you would be more, like, do things for the greater good, even if it means the death of some people. If you're, like, Remington Gray, you would be more for the welfare of, like, people and science. If you're, like, Caden, you would, like, be more logical and you want to, like, help the survivors more and sort of that. And so it just depends on what character you end up with, that it depends what, I guess, character and morals you have, because each character kind of defines a different moral dilemma and qualm that surviving in a zombie apocalypse has to do. Anyways, thank you so much for paying attention to this very long thing. I don't know how long this is, but oh god, I'm very little going to edit this because it's going to be very long. I just can't be bothered. But thank you guys. God, join, subscribe, follow. Follow my Instagram for any updates for things I'm actually creating. I'm actually creating a book right now that actually has a condensed form and like plot, so in world building that you can actually understand. I might actually make a world building podcast episode about that as well in the future. Just like no spoilers, just world building on the story. And you guys can get teased on the actual book, or you can read it right now because it's been up chapter by chapter updated. So you can read it. It's an original work. But this is one of those ones that I just probably won't make anything about it because it's just way too big and I just can't do anything except appreciate the characters and the plot and now this podcast. So yay. Thank you, follow, subscribe, comment, everything you can think of, and let me know what's up. Thanks for watching.